Hey guys, welcome back. I have another endgame tutorial for you today. This time it's a Lucena position with a rook pawn. So before beginning this tutorial, I just want to clarify that this is only a win if the opposing king is cut off 4 or more files away from the pawn. If anything closer than that, let's say the king is on e7, then this is going to be a draw. So I will first show you how to win this position, and at the end of the video I will briefly show you what happens if the black king is on e7, which is less than 4 files away from the pawn. Alright, let's begin. So the first step for white in this position is to try and bring his rook over to b8. So here rook to c1. There are other options for white in this position. For instance, he can go rook to h1, but that doesn't really work because king g7 denies the h8 square for the rook. And similarly, if rook to d1, this just wastes a tempo, allowing king to e7. The black king gets closer to the pawn, and this square is covered by the king. So this would actually be a draw. So you have to go rook c1, the most accurate move. King to e7. So naturally, black tries to get his king closer to the pawn. So his goal is to get the king to one of these key squares, c7 or c8, which would result in a draw, and more on that later on. So here rook c8, getting ready to play this. King d6. So what happens if king d7? Then here rook b8 as well. Rook a2. So you don't want to make the mistake of playing rook b7 check, because then you give the black king a free entrance into one of these key squares. And this king cannot be chased away, because if you give checks, simply king c7, king c8. And if rook b1 trying to give check here, then rook c2 completely shields the black king. So let's go back to king d7, rook b8, rook a2. So here white plays the move king b7. Black will start giving checks. But here king b6, you gotta protect the pawn. Rook b2, king c5, and white's king slowly marches towards the rook. So this would be a win for white. So going back to the main line, where king d6 is played by black. So here rook b8 as well, rook a2. And again, if rook b7, well here black can play rook h2. So threatening here. So if king to b8, then rook b8 check, this would be mate. And this would be quite embarrassing. So rook b7 doesn't quite work. But instead here again, king b7. Rook b2 check. So if king a6, trying to implement the king walking idea in the previous scenario, where black's king was on d7, but this doesn't quite work here because rook a2 check, king b6, rook b2, and because the black king is on d6, white cannot escape to c5. So here the winning idea, let's go back a few moves. After king b7, the winning idea after rook b2 is to play king c8. So if rook c2 check, king d8, and if rook h2, threatening mate on h8, how does white proceed here? Well, in this position, you play the move rook b6 check. This is the only winning move. The most challenging try for black is to go king c5. But let's first take a look at the other possible lines. If king e5, then there's rook a6 getting behind the pawn. Black can give a few checks, but white's king will eventually slip away. So what about king to d5? So here white will promote with check, and black isn't in time to play rook h8 and try to skewer king and queen. So let's go back to the most challenging try for black, king c5. So the idea here for white is to go rook c6 check. So you give up the rook in order to queen with check. So black can choose to ignore the sacrifice. He can go king b5. But here rook c8 wins. So the king will eventually come to b8. And it's completely safe, followed by a8 queen. So what about king to d5? So here rook a6. This wins. Rook to c8 wins as well. And if king to d4 or king to b4, either one of these moves, rook to c8 would win as well. So let's go back to the main line. This queen and rook ending might be intimidating, but in this case, where black's king and rook are very far apart, the win is much simpler. All that white needs to do is to try and get his queen between the king and the rook. So here queen c8, king d4, queen g4 check. White manages to accomplish this. And with a few more checks, white is going to pick up the black rook. And here it's just game over. Now let's take a look at the example where black's king is on e7. So here black's king is only 3 files away from white's pawn. So this is a drawn position, because black is just in time to get his king over to one of these key squares, which would completely entomb the white king. So here white goes rook h1, preparing to bring the rook to b8. Black gets his king closer to the key squares. And king c7, so there's not much that white can do here. If rook b8, then just rook to h2. So white can give a few checks, but this doesn't cause any problems for black, simply king c7 and king to b8. So if he tries to move here rook to b1, then simply rook c2, stopping white from going rook c1, and black holds this position without any problems. All that he needs to do is just to keep his king on c7 or c8, and he can also wait by just moving the rook. So that is all for this video, guys. I hope you managed to learn something. If you found this tutorial helpful, feel free to share it with your friends. Thanks for watching and see you soon.